UN now warning of the risk of full-scale war. And here's a look at the intensity of the violence. An entire tower block flattened by Israeli airstrikes in Gaza. At least 35 people have been killed there. And Israel says Hamas has fired more than 1,000 rockets since Monday, killing at least 5 Israelis. The UN Security Council is set to hold an urgent meeting on Wednesday over the unrest.
Sirens fill the night sky over Tel Aviv. From their rooftops, terrified residents watch the missiles descend on their city. Israel's famed Iron Dome defense system overwhelmed by the sheer number of rockets launched by Hamas from Gaza. Israel's prime minister pledged revenge. Hamas and Islamic Jihad have paid, and I tell you, they will pay a very heavy price for their aggression. I say here tonight, their blood be on their heads. Israeli airstrikes have been pounding Gaza. Here, a building housing Hamas officials is felled by Israeli bombs. Neither side is willing to back down. If Israel wants to escalate, we're ready for it. And if it wants to stop, we're also ready. If they want to remove their hand over Jerusalem, we're ready. Despite Israel's sophisticated defenses, Hamas's primitive missiles are more than a mere nuisance. They've taken lives and destroyed property. But Israeli airstrikes have extracted a much heavier toll on Gaza's population. A final goodbye as these relatives bury their loved ones. The U.S. has taken the lead in calling for a peaceful resolution to the crisis.
We are deeply concerned about the escalation between Israel and those launching rockets from Gaza, and we call for restraint and for calm. Israel has the right to defend itself and to respond to rocket attacks. The Palestinian people also have the right to safety and security.
But in such a tense situation, the right to safety and security for all sides remains an elusive goal.
Let's cross straight over to our Jerusalem correspondent, Tanya Kramer. Tanya, tell us more about those Israeli airstrikes in Gaza and the rocket attacks on Israel. What's been happening there?
Well, as we've seen in the report, it has been definitely a very difficult night for the residents in Gaza, but also for the Israeli residents under, the rocket attacks. Now, there has been a very dense air bombardment from the Israeli military overnight, and especially also in the early morning hours on Gaza. We understand that 2 residential high-rise buildings in Gaza were targeted, but also many institutional buildings like police stations in Gaza were damaged or destroyed. The destruction there is still assessed according to local sources in Gaza. At the same time, we've seen since last night also a major escalation by Hamas and the Islamic Jihad by launching rockets towards the center of Israel, including Tel Aviv. According to the Israeli army, over 1,000 rockets have been launched towards Israel, and the army says they have targeted over 500 sites in the past day and a half of these hostilities. But of course, those numbers are changing by the minute.
Now, Tanya, there's also growing tension between Arab Israelis and Jews on the ground in Israel. How serious is that?
Well, that's right. We've seen already a lot of protests here in the past weeks in mixed cities, or especially towns with an Arab Israeli or Arab Palestinian communities over the issues related to East Jerusalem, namely the pending eviction of Palestinian families in a Palestinian neighborhood in East Jerusalem. But the particular focus right now is on the city of Lod, where we've seen a lot of violence between some members of the Arab community there and Israeli police, and also between residents of the 2 communities living in the city. And that has been fueled by the shooting of a young man on Monday night from the Arab community by a Jewish resident. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has now declared the city in a state of emergency and has ordered reinforcements in the city to restore calm, as he said.
Okay, well, with all that happening, the UN, as we mentioned, is warning of full-scale war that could break out. What efforts are being made to prevent that?
Well, we have heard a lot of statements now also by the United Nations and the international community calling for the de-escalation. It is unclear at the moment whether both sides have an interest now at this particular time to de-escalate. What happens usually, what we've seen in previous round, at least behind the scenes, mediation efforts are usually going on between brokered by actors like Egypt, Qatar, and the United Nations and others, trying to mediate between the militant factions in Gaza and Israel. But at the moment, it's not clear whether this is happening and what kind of political maneuvering, what space is there to end those hostilities at that particular point now in time.
Tanya, thank you. That was DW's Tanya Kramer in Jerusalem.